Workplace culture. What is it? Why is it so important? And it is a factor in retention of employees and actually attraction of new employees. But how does it apply to the younger workforce? What are they looking for in your workplace culture? And how can you be agile and make the changes and adjustments you need to keep them engaged? We're going to talk about that today. Welcome to episode 35 of the KeyHire Small Business Podcast, where we cover issues that help owners scale their small business. I'm Corey Harlock, creator of KeyHire Solutions, where we grow Texas small business with our talent, and I'll be your host. Today, our guest is Dale Wetmore. He is the CEO of Gifts of the Next Generation, a little foreshadowing into what we're going to talk about. And he's a coaching and consulting firm that helps leaders reach across the generation gap to work with young employees. A couple interesting notes about Dale. He's got 20 years of experience from some big players. He's worked in the tech industry, including small little companies you might have heard of called Microsoft and Amazon Web Services. He is a dangerous dude, as well as Joe Rogan might enjoy talking to him as well. He teaches a smart street self-defense, and he has 2 black belts. I know one of them's in Taekwondo, and he's also a skier. Loves to go to Colorado, do some skiing, and he's hoping to see some wildlife, but he's never had the opportunity to see anything. Hoping to catch a glimpse of maybe a bear or a bobcat, something cool like that. We have that in common. We're both skiers and like to ski in I guess the same mountain chain, just different aspects of it. So Matt, let's bring on Dale. Hey man, how you doing?
Splendid. How are you, Corey?
Cool. So I didn't grow up, but I learned to ski on the northern part of that mountain chain that runs from Western Canada down through the Western United States. I have been out to Colorado a long time ago. Man, that the altitude gets you if you're not used to it. Boy, oh boy, your first day or two there are rough.
I tell you, I'm used to 5,000 feet, and even going to 10,000 in the mountains is rough for me. So I hear you.
It's crazy town. Like you go out there, you're already a mile above sea level, and then you get on the chairs and you end up another mile above sea level, and you're wondering what's going on. It's crazy town. So I'm so excited to be talking to you about this because a lot of people want to put labels and things on who we are, how old we are, where we come from, all that good stuff. And I think we were just talking before we came on camera about no matter what age group you come from, we have great workers and great employees, and we have lazy, shitty employees, right? We got them at my age and everywhere down to the people coming into the workforce. But what I want to kind of do is get some definition. So we're talking about a younger workforce. We're going to try not to use labels because people are people. And so we got a younger workforce. So let's talk about, what are you defining as a younger workforce? And then maybe let's define kind of some of the challenges that we're going to talk about. And we also need a third definition around what is culture. So actually, maybe we need to do those in reverse, but let's give a quick definition around what company culture is, who we're talking about, and some of the challenges a business owner might face.
Yeah, all right. So I define company culture as the expectations, norms, mores, etc., that a business has, and many of them are not written down and sometimes not even spoken. So part of the challenge is when you get a young person who enters your company, if they think being on time to a meeting is 15 minutes late, well, that's a cultural difference. And that's a big thing that's going on nowadays with younger people is the cultural differences are bigger than they used to be, say, 15 years ago. And that is the problem I'm helping leaders overcome.
And I love the fact that you said sometimes the culture isn't defined. A lot of companies will do core values. And I've actually had a couple conversations around this lately. At the end of the day, my personal belief is, and please feel free to agree or disagree, but core values aren't the words you put on a piece of paper and stick on a wall. It's the way the leader or leaders of the company behave at the end of the day that creates the culture and the core values of a company.
Yeah. And then, in terms of defining young people, if you ever hear the phrase Generation Z, that's 27 and younger in the workforce, I'm not big on those labels because, yeah, I think everyone should deserves to be judged as an individual. On the other hand, people age 33 and under grew up in a very different time. If you look at technology and when Facebook hit the website and when Facebook hit the phone, they do come from a much different culture. And so, what I try to do is take a little peek into that culture so that the leader knows what they're dealing with. And then we give three main tips to help the leader work with young people.
Okay, so there's kind of the where they come from, and we've defined who they are and some of the differences, which is great. So um, let's get into now kind of some mistakes. And I know through experience, I've had lots of conversations with my business owners around what are we doing wrong? We're trying to hire young people and it's just not working out. We can't get them to buy in, or we're not speaking the same language, or they have different priorities. And again, it doesn't mean they're bad people or bad employees. Maybe it means we're speaking two different languages. So maybe let's kind of we'll start heading into what kind of mistakes as a business owner can you make around working with a younger person who comes from a different time and place than you do.
One of the big mistakes I make has to do with communication. Certainly, if you don't tell your employees that they're doing a bad job, they probably won't change. So if they're showing up 15 minutes late to the meeting, that's not okay with you. You have to tell them. But what we find is that even when business leaders do communicate, that young people can be very sensitive to feedback. And so I would say one of the big mistakes is either damaging feedback or just non existent feedback.
Okay. Can you think of anything else other than feedback? What other mistakes might? And I think that's great, right? Like that's just having the conversations with people and trying to set an expectation. Well, let me ask you this question. Do you think the younger generation here are unable to adapt to change and adapt to what you're trying to do? Or whose duty or job is it to change the expectations?
I totally believe that people can adapt, or that most of them can, certainly. I also believe it's the job of the leader to lead the way in terms of adaptation. I mean, you do have to meet in the middle, and the employee does have to be interested in adapting and learning. But if you're a leader, you're the one who leads, and it's really your job to own it.
And then, so what in a real simple, kind of straightforward way, what, how would you encourage someone to maybe lead that change?
The simplest way I believe in leading the change is doing three things. I call it communicate, coach, and create a culture that works for everybody. So, spoke a little bit about communication, right? One of the mistakes is damaging or non-existent feedback. Another mistake that falls under coaching is being a distant manager. So when I was coming up in college, you studied management in college, and leadership was, or management was, you give somebody goals and then you come back a year later and you say, here's how you did. But today, and this is all over Silicon Valley where I have some of my experience, they say that the best leaders are great coaches. And so, what you want to be doing is being actively involved on a weekly basis in terms of what's going on with your employees, even if it's just 15 minutes a week. People need to be involved like that. And I think the third way to change the culture is really to discuss, well, what's important to your employees and what's important to you, and give and take a little. So, for example, I have a client where he said, look, I'm sorry, but you absolutely need to be on time for meetings. So that was a place where he did not bend. But some of his employees said, I'm just not a morning person, and this 8:30 a.m. show up, it doesn't work for me. Can I please come in at 9:30? They were able to work that out because, of course, those employees worked later. So creating a culture by kind of giving and taking so that it works for everybody is one of the third ways that you can work with these people.
Interesting. Okay. Um, so something that just struck me what you said, you know, I'm just not a morning person, and changing those hours and your work, I can literally hear my small business owners' brains exploding when you say something like that. Like, what? We should consider changing the time of our meeting and the schedule of our people to accommodate their preference, maybe. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, if it works for your business, I mean, certainly if you're running a restaurant and you open at 11, you have to have employees in place, right? But there's plenty of there's plenty of talented people who don't necessarily show up at 8 o'clock as their best selves. And if it's just really arbitrary, if you like showing up to work at 8 or 7, and you start to think that early means better, that's a place where you can give and take. And I want to say it's important because there are right now people 33 and under are about 36% of the workforce. In 7 years, they'll be over half. And if we as leaders don't learn to adapt, we're going to struggle to hire the best people. Our competitors will hire the best people, and the best people will be going to our competitors just because we haven't learned how to lead or we haven't learned how to be flexible. That's why it's crucially important to learn about young people and the best way to lead them.
But I'm getting the sense of it. There should be a little give and take, right? And we're not going to make these accommodations for poor performers, probably. Yeah. So walk me kind of through the decision making process there, or what would you recommend in terms of, okay, we have a really strong performer and they do their best work from 10 to 8, but our core hours are 9 to 5. But this person delivers quality on time above expectation. Do we sit them down every week and say, look, you got to be on time, I need you here at 9? Or do we manage the result and say, man, I don't care when you work as long as you keep delivering at the way you are? How do we navigate that?
Well, you're right on target there, Corey, and that is you're speaking with them and asking, right? Yeah. So really, it's look, if you need them to be there at 9 o'clock because that's when the doors open, or that's because you have your staff meeting, then that's something that they have to bend on. But on the other hand, if a lot of this is, let's say, you're coding or you're going through inventory or something, and they can show up at 10 and do a good job, then they actually consider that to be a huge benefit to that you're flexing for them, and you will get more loyalty from them. But the point is most people leave it undefined. So they think, okay, everybody understands that you're coming in at 8, and everybody understands that you're going to be absolutely on time for meetings, and everybody understands that when I text you at 10 p.m., I want an answer right away. And really, you need to define these things. So, for example, if they say they want work life balance, which is one of the big things young people ask for, you say, okay, I absolutely need you during working hours, but after work, I'm not going to text you unless it's an absolute emergency. And I don't expect you to respond to an email until the next morning, unless, again, it's an absolute emergency because you need your time off. So does that help you discuss what's important to them, what's important to you?
Yeah, and I think there's a good distinction there because in my mind, we can train each other in ways. As an employee, if I respond to your text at 10 o'clock at night, in a way, I'm giving you permission to continue texting me at 10 o'clock at night. If you text me at 10 o'clock at night and I respond you at 8 o'clock in the morning, now I'm training you that you can text me whenever you want, but I'll get back to you when I'm working or it's convenient for me. And oftentimes those aren't spoken. That's not spoken. There might be an expectation from an owner or a leader that you get back to me. And the expectation of the employee, in this case, someone from a younger generation, might be when I'm not working, I'm not working. And now we've created this conflict, this hazy, unspoken conflict in there where the leader or the owner is frustrated because they never get back to me when I text them. And the employee is living their life thinking, I get back when I'm at work. And they're often, I find people are really, I don't know if afraid's the right word, but that conversation is a hard one for people to have, to say, hey, when I text you, I need you to get back to me, versus, hey, I know you text me late at night, but I'm not going to get back to you till work starts the next day. So you can load me up with texts and I'll bang them out. But that always seems like a difficult conversation, and who initiates that?
The conversation should be initiated by the leader, and it's something so that the leader can feel comfortable. Client I worked with, who was actually a subordinate, made an exchange. He wanted to work remote. He works from his condominium 1,000 miles from company headquarters, and he doesn't need to interact elbow by elbow very much. So that's the benefit he gets. The arrangement he made, however, is that email will be answered during working hours, but texts I will answer immediately, provided I am awake. And since he reports to the chief financial officer, he occasionally gets questions in the middle of the night. Um, that was what they worked out, and it felt like a win for both people. He doesn't mind answering a text at 9 p.m., and they don't mind the fact that he lives remote.
It's funny, Dale, because when we work with business owners and bringing people into their business, we always compare the what we call the candidate driver comparison. And I've always said there's only 7 things you can negotiate when it comes to the role, right? You can negotiate title, you can negotiate salary, you can negotiate incentive, benefit, 401k, PTO, and schedule. And that schedule piece uh, is what I used to think is it in office, hybrid, or remote? But there might even be part of this that needs to be negotiated at the beginning about the boundaries, right? What are the core hours of work, but what is the expectation beyond those core hours? If I get an email from you at 8 o'clock at night, what's your expectation? Or if you text me on Sunday, what's the expectation? And I'm wondering if we need to start talking a little more about that stuff up front, because we're always looking for longevity with our employees. We want them to be sticky, and these breaking of boundaries could be something that could drive someone out of your company if they're a good employee. If you just kind of get into a bit of a tete-a-tete about it.
It is absolutely about boundaries, and young people are very much about boundaries. I don't remember the phrase boundaries 15 years ago, and now I hear it all the time. I think it's the part of our changing culture. So you've heard of ghosting. Again, ghosting is not a word I heard 15 years ago. So employees will be like, "Oh, this isn't really working out, and I don't want to have a confrontation. So I'll just ghost you. I will just leave the company, and you won't even know why."
So Dale, another way I've found to kind of go into a challenging conversation, and I learned this because when I ask questions, I can be super direct, and oftentimes it puts people on their heels because they don't know what my motives are, other than trying to get more information. And a line I've found that's really helpful for me is, I don't have an opinion here. I'm just being curious. I just want to understand more. And I felt that's another way to kind of disarm people and open up an honest conversation that allows people to speak from a place of trying to explain versus trying to defend their point of view. I don't know what you think about that.
So one of the things, probably the biggest helpful thing I coach clients is about have good feedback. And I say that because when I was, so let's say 15 years ago, feedback was like, you need to do X more and you need to do this less. And right, you need to shape up, and that's your feedback. And nobody likes that. And then recently there was the sandwich feedback where you say, well, here's what you're doing well, and then here's what you're doing wrong, and then by the way, thank you for doing this well. And there's been like 4 studies out in the past 5 years that say that doesn't work for various reasons. So Adam Grant has come out with I think it's a 7-step process of giving feedback, and I boiled it down to 3 things. So here's the new way to give feedback: ask, explain, dialogue. So the first step is ask. Just say, ask, are you open to some feedback? Or can we talk about expectations in terms of working hours or something like that? The reason that's useful is people are less defensive when they take ownership of the decision to listen. Once they've taken ownership, yes, I'm open to some feedback. The second step is explain. Explain the reason for the feedback with some positivity. In other words, I believe in you. I have high expectations of you, and I believe you can reach these expectations. According to one study, that increases openness to feedback by 40%. And then the last thing is dialogue, and I say dialogue, not monologue. Here's a great way to do dialogue. Your employee comes to the meeting on time, but then they spend their time looking at their phone instead of participating. And instead of a monologue, get your nose out of your phone. You can have a dialogue. Here's how I experienced it. I experienced that you weren't present emotionally, mentally at the meeting. Was that your intent? When you ask in that way, asking was that your intent, they realize that their behavior could be coming across different than what they intended, and then they could go, oh no, we had that a lot when I was working for a startup in Silicon Valley about 8 years ago. Lots of really smart engineers who did not understand you didn't look at your phone when you were talking to somebody, and we eventually had to say, I know that's the culture you grew up in, I know that's the way it is in engineering school at Stanford, but at this company here, we look eye to eye. And um, that was a huge breakthrough. So now we didn't have it boiled down to that point, but the idea with feedback, ask, explain, dialogue, is a much better way to give feedback. And when you do that a couple times as a leader, you'll realize, oh, I can have a conversation without people getting defensive. And then it becomes a non hard conversation, or at least an easier conversation, because you know that nobody's going to blow up. You're not going to blow up, and hopefully they're not going to blow up. And it's like, okay, we actually can talk about what being on time is here in this company.
My wife has the best of all. When she starts a relationship with a leader, part of her introduction is, I want to have a relationship where we can always be honest. Are you open to that? So then when she goes down the road, she can say to them, do you remember a way back I asked if I could always be honest with you? Can I be honest with you right now? And their default is, oh yes, of course, that would be great. And now she's opened up that door, and I think that's a really smart way to approach it as well.
I love that, Corey. It's brilliant. There's something called a harsh startup, which is something that psychologists talk about in general in terms of all human interaction. So it applies in marriages, it applies in friendships, and it also applies at work. And a harsh startup is just that somebody asks a question and the other person gets defensive. So your softening statement there that you use, Corey, which is I don't have an opinion, I just want to understand, is a great way to avoid the harsh startup. Likewise with feedback, if you ask, are you open to getting some feedback? It's a much better startup than, listen, pal, I got to tell you something.
Yeah, very cool. So we've talked a lot about kind of the mistakes, and we've nibbled around the edges of some actual actionable pieces of advice. So we always like to close with, other than calling you, Dale, if you were sitting with a business owner and you could give them 2, 3, 5 pieces of advice to be better at communicating with someone from a younger generation, or getting them to assimilate into the culture, or um, morphing your culture to accommodate more people, what are those top pieces of advice that you could offer them?
Top pieces of advice I'd offer: number one is Communicate. Work very hard at that. Be explicit. Another part of the communication, so we'll call this number two, is having the softening statement, a soft startup, so that people don't get defensive. We talked at number three about be a coach, not a distant manager. There's a school of thought nowadays that says if you spend 15 minutes a week with your subordinate and you ask very specific questions like, what are you working on and what help do you need? That is more motivational than spending 45 minutes a week. And it's certainly more motivational than leaving your people alone thinking that they don't want to be micromanaged. So, yeah, number three would be a regular check in. And then the fourth thing would be what we talked about with regard to creating a culture together. Find out what's important to them and their culture. Be explicit about what's important to you in the company culture and work together so that you can all come to agreement on what the new culture is.
And I find the term micro is being way overused, but this almost feels like micro cultures in the sense of you have a company culture that in my opinion is a reflection of the owner and leadership group. But you're going to have people within that culture. And I actually just read an interesting article on this about each department will have a subculture that fits in under the overarching culture. And then within each division or area of that business, that leader might need to create a microculture within the subculture that fits under the umbrella culture of the company. And it feels a little bit like managing individuals versus managing a group of people. You know, it's here's how we all act versus here's the overarching, here's what you're going to be measured on, and here's how we expect you to perform. But there's wiggle room within that. So we'll talk to the individuals and see what's important to them to perform at a high level. And obviously the caveat here is you wouldn't want to give this amount of influence to a poor performer or someone who you don't see being in your company long term, or is a toxic employee who you know you're going to eventually need to get rid of. But with these high performers, it's just giving them a little bit of give and take within the overarching culture is what it feels like to me. Correct me if I'm missing the point.
You're not missing the point. I think you're right on, Corey. Provided their give and take is still consistent with your culture, that's really important. So, for example, if I was going to run a Chick-fil-A, part of Chick-fil-A's culture is you're really polite. And if the person, no matter how hard they work, isn't polite, that would be like, that's a non-negotiable. But, however, yes, I mean, right, within marriages and love relationships, there's something called love languages. Some people are really motivated by one thing, other people are motivated by something else. That's part of being a leader, is to understand how people are motivated and to motivate them using those things.
I think there's a level of sophistication that owners need to get to as they go through their leadership journey. And another thing I think I heard you do is three classifications. There's being a manager, there's being a leader, and then there's being a coach in amongst those. And the difference between management and leadership is, do what I say. The leader is do as I do. And then the coach is, hey, let's kind of work together and build this together type thing. But I think that's part of the evolution of being a good leader, is going from managing a company to managing a group of people to managing individuals within the group. And that would be maybe the highest level and the hardest level to get to.
It is. And that's why it's so cool in some ways, because if you can learn to lead young people, you can get more of the great ones to work for you instead of your competitor.
Because we know they're talking to each other.
Yeah. And as if you're a leader in maybe, let's say, a larger business, that's great for your leadership career in terms of getting promoted if you become known as somebody who can work with people of all ages and types.
For sure. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Dale, I think There's some really valuable information there, and I certainly value your time. If people have enjoyed the conversation and want to learn more from you or reach out to you to get some advice, how can we get in contact with you?
Best ways through my website, giftofnextgen.com, or my LinkedIn, and Dale Wetmore, last name Wetmore. I'm on LinkedIn and posting often.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time today. I've enjoyed the conversation. If the listeners didn't figure it out, we did have a little technical difficulty, but we hope we were able to rectify those and get the message out. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too, Corey. Thank you.
All right, there you go, Dale Wetmore. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning into the KeyHire Small Business Podcast. If you got value out of today's episode and want to keep up to date with our new content, make sure you leave a comment here on YouTube or let us know what you think of this episode. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We need subscribers. We love subscribers. If you prefer to listen to your podcast, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, or whatever your favorite platform is by searching up the KeyHire Small Business Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about working with KeyHire and how we can help your small business, you can schedule a meeting on our website. We are a help-first organization, so we guarantee no selling, no weirdness. We're just here to help if we can. Thanks for listening. I'm Corey Harlock, and until next time, stop grinding, start growing.